Hello everyone, this is Serious Trivia. As we turn the page on 2020 and head into 2021, I hope everyone's having a safe and happy holiday seasons. Here on the channel, we're celebrating this with a 12 Days of Christmas special featuring 12 separate top 5 lists related to the game Total War 3 Kingdoms. And after the last 10 days of looking at different ways to improve the game, and also spending the last 4 in particular looking at some of the key characters that should be joining the rosters of major factions, today we're going to shift our focus to some of the key characters in minor factions that would also deserve an art upgrade in the game. So we're going to kick our list with Pang De here, and you might notice that for some of the characters on this list, like Pang De here in particular, they are going to eventually become a general under one of the 3 kingdoms, and in this case he will become a general for the kingdom of Wei. And this is only natural because in this period that's called the 3 Kingdoms, there's going to be survivorship bias pretty much everywhere. So all the characters that are noteworthy are those that would serve under one of the 3 main kingdoms or are key opponents of these 3 main kingdoms that were destroyed. So maybe they're other minor faction leaders. So it's going to be quite hard to find non-leader characters in minor factions that are noteworthy who do not transition into becoming a general for one of the major factions. And we even mentioned some of these characters already in our previous list when we did the major factions. Now this does mean it's probably bad news for some players who, from a gameplay perspective, like to play some of the minor factions, who might end up with no other unique characters aside from your leader at the start of the game. So for the most part on this list, I try my best to find generals of note from some of the other minor rosters to give them some additional characters to use. And in the case of Pang De here, he'll be a great addition to Ma Teng's faction, and he'll be a perfect pick, and the best pick in my opinion for this type of minor character being added in, because he first served Ma Teng out west, where he was an excellent general, showcasing his skills in campaigns against Yuan Shao's vassals, particularly Gao Gan's faction. And later on, he would go on to serve Ma Chao when Ma Teng got an office job with Cao Cao. So Ma Chao and Pang De would be the 2 generals guarding out west. Then when Ma Chao decided to rebel against Cao Cao, he joined Ma Chao in that effort against Cao Cao before running away to join Zhang Lu after losing to Cao Cao. And when Ma Chao and Pang De were both serving under Zhang Lu, they did part ways, so Pang De eventually became a general under Zhang Lu only, while Ma Chao went on to join Liu Bei. So Pang De also has some time working with Zhang Lu, which is a general we said would most likely become a free LC general in the future, so he's definitely going to get an art upgrade as well as his own faction mechanic. And then from that point on, Zhang Lu will go on to surrender to Cao Cao eventually, where Pang De would finally join the Cao Wei regime and become a general under Cao Cao, where he was tasked to help defend Fancheng against Guan Yu, and that's where he would meet his ultimate end at the hands of Guan Yu. And that would actually cement his place in history, making him semi-important, as everything that Liu Bei's faction touches in Romance of the 3 Kingdoms becomes gold, as the author of that novel tend to elevate the opponents of people against Liu Bei's faction in order to indirectly elevate how great Liu Bei's faction is when they defeat these great opponents. And Pang De is definitely one of these cases, and Pang De is pretty special in that situation because Pang De has a brother who actually works for Liu Bei at the time, so when Guan Yu captured him after the flooding at Fancheng, he offered him to join them. And Pang De valiantly refused on the ground that Cao Cao's regime is the official regime and Liu Bei is just a traitor. And Guan Yu, of course, executed him. And that kind of cemented Pang De's position as Cao Cao eventually awarded him, after his death, with some marquis titles for his loyalty. And I believe Pang De, since he is a general under potentially 4 different factions, Ma Teng, Ma Chao, Zhang Lu, and eventually Cao Cao in a later chapter pack, he'll make a great addition here. And as I already mentioned, since Zhang Lu is a character that I have listed on a free LC list, he's not going to appear on this list because if you're going to be a free LC lord, you're going to get your own artwork. That also applies to people like Zhang Xiu, who I also mentioned on the free LC list, as well as his uncle Zhang Ji, who might also become the free LC faction instead of Zhang Xiu, but we'll see on that. And then for some generals with similar history background like Zhang He, who had worked for Yuan Shao and then worked for Cao Cao, since we already listed him on Cao Cao's list, he's also not going to show up here. And if we want to know a little bit more about Pang De, just a little trivia, he is given the title of White Horse General in the game right now as a generic champion. And both his title as well as his character class are both pretty fitting, because Pang De is known to like to ride white horses to the point where his enemies often recognize him by the horse he's riding, because far away from the battlefield you can't really tell which general is which, and if you see his horse you know it's Pang De. And this phenomenon even applied to Guan Yu's army when they were fighting Pang De, as they recognized his strength, as Pang De was one of the few fierce frontline generals who would charge into the chaos of the battlefield to slay the enemy commander, as he did during the battles in his early days against Yuan Shao's forces. And this was a feat that very few generals at this time did, and one of those on the short list would be Guan Yu himself. So the showdown between two of them at the Battle of Fancheng is quite a fitting end for Pang De's life, and also shows you how strong Pang De actually is, and him being a champion who excels at dueling, which is the role of champions in the game, definitely fits his theme of being able to rush into the enemy forces to slay the enemy commander. So Pang De will be a great addition here. And continue this theme of people who Guan Yu killed, the next two characters on our list are going to be quite familiar, as they are Yan Liang and Wen Chou. And if we look at some of the artworks right away, you can see that in Sanguosha, the card game, Yan Liang and Wen Chou is made into one card as they share the card art, as they really share the same fate in Romance of the Three Kingdoms. They're both there to provide an opponent for Guan Yu, to have Guan Yu kill them and make Guan Yu look better. And historically speaking, only Yan Liang was killed by Guan Yu, but Yan Liang was actually killed by Guan Yu in one of these battlefield fights where Guan Yu charged in and actually killed Yan Liang on the battlefield 1v1, which is a rare thing back in those days. Wen Chou, on the other hand, did not die to Guan Yu at all. Wen Chou's cavalry was chasing Cao Cao's forces, and Cao Cao's strategist Xun You set a trap for him by abandoning the livestock that Cao Cao's force was carrying to attract the attention of Wen Chou's force to loot rather than fight, and then with about a 600 unit of cavalry charge, they were able to slay Wen Chou in the chaos of the battle. So there was no 1v1 duel with Guan Yu in that situation. And even in the Yan Liang case, where Yan Liang fought Guan Yu 1v1, that whole battle was set up by Xun You as well. So Xun You, the strategist who recently got his artwork in the game, was actually responsible for the death of both Yan Liang and Wen Chou. And for those of you who might be unfamiliar with these two generals, they will be added into Yuan Shao's faction, as they were often heralded as Yuan Shao's best generals. But in reality, Yuan Shao actually had a lot of talented generals. But Yan Liang and Wen Chou tend to be the one who had the best brute strength. So if you want a 1v1 fight on the battlefield, they're probably your best choices. But both of them lack cunning and strategy, and was often their shortfall. Now, it's not to say that Yuan Shao didn't have generals that were all well-rounded, but many of those tend to have held themselves in a high position, and Yuan Shao didn't get along with many of them and actually caused the deaths of a few of them. And we'll probably talk about that if we ever get a lore series about Yuan Shao. But for this list, I think Yan Liang and Wen Chou, just for their fame from Romance of the Three Kingdoms and their current position in the game, they definitely deserve a position here on our list. So they're going to take 2 and 3, and hopefully if Guandu DLC happens, both of them will get featured. So this brings us to the fourth character on the list, and that would be Guo Si. Now, most of this list here are characters that would appear on the 190 chapter pack, because that's currently the main focal point of the game, as we have 182, 190, and 194. So as the center point and the base game starting point, I hope most of these characters get added in to help players get a more flushed out roster. And Guo Si would start out in Dong Zhuo's faction, and in the 194, he would probably be under Li Jue's faction. Now, Guo Si and Li Jue are often interconnected in history. They're often compared together, as they were both subordinates to Dong Zhuo, and after Lu Bu's betrayal, both of them teamed up together along with Zhang Ji, which is Zhang Xiu's uncle, and they teamed up together to retake Chang'an from Lu Bu, and they were also the ones who actually killed Wang Yun, or the mastermind behind Dong Zhuo's assassination, to retake the court and hold the emperor hostage. So technically, Guo Si and Li Jue were basically mini Dong Zhuo's, and Li Jue is already designed that way. And I think the reason why of the two, Li Jue got an art upgrade is because he was a vanguard character in the game, and he looked similar to Dong Zhuo. So passing on Dong Zhuo's faction to him eventually in the Civil War made more sense from a game design perspective, but in history, Guo Si is just as relevant, if not more so. And the cooperation between the two of them was very difficult because, as you can imagine, it's easy for two of them to band together to fight a common enemy like Wang Yun and Lu Bu. But the second they win, it's hard for them to work together, as now who is going to be the next chancellor of the state? Who's going to be one running the government? And both of them don't have that talent because both of them are really just generals from the Xiliang region. They're not really skilled diplomats or skilled politicians. So there's often friction between the two. And you also had little stories like Li Jue often take Guo Si out for drinks, get him drunk, and then give him woman, which really made Guo Si's wife mad. So Guo Si's wife would often tell Guo Si that Li Jue is trying to kill him and point out that some food might be poisoned, creating this divide between the two, to the point where in the end they decided to exchange hostages of their kids. And first they were trying to exchange sons, which is the normal custom of the days, but it turned out Li Jue's wife was very against that, so they ended up exchanging daughters. It's quite a mess. But in the end, their downfall would come when they lost control of the emperor, where Cao Cao eventually rescued the emperor, because at that point, they really had no legitimacy. They were basically bandits. They ran Chang'an to the ground because they let their troop loot all they want for a few years. So they are basically mini Dongzhuos, but Guo Si is still very important, and if Li Jue can get an artwork, I think Guo Si definitely deserves one. And it would actually be more interesting if you divide the two factions up and actually showcase a civil war during the start of the world betrayed scenario, but since they went with Li Jue, maybe we won't see that happening. But if Li Jue becomes some sort of free LC for a DLC, which has happened in Warhammer, where let's say he's playable in a world betrayed, then Guo Si will be a great addition to his faction. And his in-game background has many good bonuses in terms of retinue upkeep faction-wide discounts. So I think seeing him with artwork would be quite a nice addition. And finally, we have another character who goes on to serve two different factions, as I feel like they have the most utility in the game, and this will be Mi Zhu. Now, Mi Zhu starts out in Tao Tian's faction, and eventually moves on to Liu Bei's faction. And we already see this transition with the 194 start. And Mi Zhu is quite important, not because he's skilled, but because he's rich. So Mi Zhu comes from a family of merchants that lives in the Xu province, and their entire family business is taking uncultivated land and turning them into farmland and making tax money on them or selling the land to other developers. So they're kind of land developers back in the day, but most of the land went to farming because that's what made money, as grain was pretty much a currency instead of building houses, let's say. So that's how their family become wealthy, and they are extremely wealthy. We're talking about hundreds of millions of wealth, so no small amount. And because of their wealth, when Tao Tian became the governor in the Xu province, he valued the Mi clan greatly. And when Liu Bei joined Tao Tian asked Mi Zhu to help Liu Bei out. And that's when Liu Bei and Mi Zhu got to know each other and became friends. And when Lu Bu joined Liu Bei for a temporary period and then betrayed Liu Bei, where he was holding Liu Bei's family hostage, at that point Liu Bei's wife was Lady Gan. Liu Bei had to retreat along with Mi Zhu to a different part of the Xu province, and since Liu Bei's wife was now hostage, where he doesn't know if she's alive or not, Mi Zhu actually took the opportunity and offered up his sister, Lady Mi, as Liu Bei's wife. That's why usually you see the word ji under concubines and lady reserved for main wife. And that's why Liu Bei actually had two main wives at the end. There is Lady Gan and Lady Mi, as both of them are main wife because he married Lady Mi when he didn't know if Lady Gan was still alive or not. So that's another little thing there. And that kind of cemented Mi Zhu's role in Liu Bei's faction, as he's now Liu Bei's brother-in-law and he can bankroll Liu Bei through many of his campaigns. So Mi Zhu was always held in high regard. He was never a general, even though he holds many general titles. He never commanded men. His younger brother Mi Fang did, but Mi Fang sadly ended up surrendering in the battles to the kingdom of Wu, right when Guan Yu was getting betrayed instead of helping Guan Yu out, which caused Guan Yu's death. So the Mi clan didn't end very well, even though Liu Bei never blamed Mi Zhu for his brother's faults. Mi Zhu's clan was kind of neglected at that point. but their clan was always held in extremely high respect before that point. Because when Liu Bei first entered the Yi province and had his own kingdom, he gave out general titles to all his generals and advisors. And the highest ranking advisor title that he handed out was to Mi Zhu, with Zhuge Liang falling behind that. So you can see how important Mi Zhu was valued in the faction. Not really for his strategies or anything, but just for his position of status inside the kingdom of Shu. So for someone like this, also with an interesting background, being a really wealthy merchant, I think he definitely deserves his own artwork. Perhaps some special skills that makes him an extremely powerful administrator in the game, because that would be quite interesting, as most of the active skills that are given to generals tend to be more battle focused. Maybe we can have an innovation here where you have a passive battle skill that is actually focused or activated when you are an administrator. That would be quite nice as well. So that's going to do it for our list of 5 major characters for minor factions, even though many of these characters turned out to work for major factions at the end. But I think this is probably the best balance you can have, as after all, many of these minor factions shouldn't really even be factions, as people like Kong Rong, in my mind, do not deserve their own factions. Therefore, it's really hard to find a character that worked under him, because historically, that just didn't exist. So that's going to do it for us for this list. Now you might notice there's no female in this list, and that's because tomorrow we'll have a female only list, as we'll talk about 5 female characters that deserves an art upgrade, and that would obviously exclude any characters we have mentioned so far in any of our other lists. So come back for that, and see you guys then. Bye!